In the summer of 1976, beneath the scorching Nevada sun, a routine Air Force payroll transport vanished without explanation. $3.9 million in federal cash disappeared in broad daylight, leaving behind no witnesses, no demands, and no second chances. The money was gone. The perpetrators were ghosts. And for 27 years, the desert kept its secrets buried under sand and silence. But in 2003, when a routine property inspection uncovered something unusual in the basement of a modest ranch house just 12 miles from the base, investigators realized they had stumbled onto the first real clue in nearly 3 decades. What they found wasn't the money itself, but something far more valuable. Evidence that would finally crack open one of the most perfectly executed military heists in American history. Before we dive deeper, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you. And don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. On the morning of August 14, 1976, at Nellis Air Force Base outside Las Vegas, a standard military transport prepared for what should have been a routine 40-minute drive. The armored vehicle, operated by contracted security personnel, was loaded with payroll funds destined for a smaller installation near the California border. Inside the reinforced compartment sat canvas bags containing $3.9 million in mixed denominations, all pre-counted and sealed according to federal protocols. The route was familiar. Traveled monthly, without incident for over 2 years. The road stretched through open desert, past scattered Joshua trees and rocky outcroppings, with minimal civilian traffic and clear sight lines in every direction. 2 guards rode in the front cabin, while a third remained positioned in the rear compartment with the cash. All 3 were experienced, bonded, and had undergone extensive background checks. None had exhibited any behavior that would raise suspicion. At exactly 9:15 in the morning, the transport departed the base through the main security checkpoint. Radio contact was established with dispatch, and the estimated arrival time was confirmed as 10 o'clock. The morning was clear, visibility unlimited, and traffic minimal. Everything proceeded according to standard operating procedure. But the vehicle never reached its destination. When the transport failed to arrive by 10:30, base security initiated contact protocols. Radio calls went unanswered. A search helicopter was dispatched along the primary route, followed by ground units from both installations. The desert offered few hiding places, and the road was essentially straight with only minor elevation changes. Finding a missing armored truck should have been simple. At 11:45, searchers located the abandoned vehicle sitting in a shallow wash approximately 18 miles from Nellis. The transport appeared undamaged from the outside, positioned as if it had been deliberately driven off the road and parked. The engine was cold, doors were closed but unlocked, and the interior showed no signs of struggle or violence. The 3 guards were nowhere to be found. Inside the rear compartment, investigators discovered something that defied immediate explanation. The reinforced steel door, designed to withstand significant force, hung open. The locking mechanism showed no signs of damage, suggesting it had been opened from the inside using the proper key. The canvas bags that should have contained the payroll were gone, replaced by an equal number of identical bags filled with cut newspaper and sand to match the original weight. The deception was methodical. Each substitute bag had been carefully prepared to feel authentic when handled. The newspaper used was several months old, suggesting advanced planning rather than spontaneous action. The sand appeared to have been collected locally, but from multiple locations based on varying color and texture. Someone had invested considerable time and effort into creating convincing decoys. More puzzling was the condition of the guards' equipment. 3 service weapons lay neatly arranged on the floor of the compartment, along with radios, identification badges, and personal effects. Everything was accounted for except the men themselves and the money. No blood, no shell casings, no indication of violence or coercion. The guards had simply vanished. The initial response focused on the possibility of abduction. Federal agents interviewed family members, reviewed financial records, and examined recent behavior patterns for all three men. Marcus Thompson, the senior guard, had worked military transport for 8 years with an exemplary record. His wife reported normal behavior in the days leading up to the incident, and his bank account showed no unusual activity. The second guard had recently been promoted and was planning his wedding for the following month. The third was 2 years from retirement and had no known financial pressures. None of the three had significant debt, gambling problems, or connections to organized crime. Their backgrounds were clean, their associations legitimate, and their families genuinely shocked by the disappearance. Yet the evidence suggested inside involvement. The rear door could only be opened by someone with access to the keys, and the careful preparation of decoy bags indicated advanced knowledge of procedures and timing. A massive search operation expanded across southern Nevada and eastern California. Roadblocks were established, aircraft deployed, and ground teams combed the desert for any trace of the missing men. Local law enforcement agencies were briefed and asked to watch for suspicious activity or unusual spending patterns. Banks received alerts to flag large cash deposits or currency exchanges. Despite the scale of the effort, no leads emerged. The desert revealed no footprints, vehicle tracks, or abandoned equipment beyond the original transport. Interviews with residents along possible escape routes yielded no sightings of unfamiliar vehicles or individuals. It was as if the guards and the money had been erased from existence. 3 days after the disappearance, a break in the case seemed to emerge when a witness reported seeing a small aircraft flying low over the desert near the abandoned transport site on the morning of the incident. The witness, a ranch hand working cattle in the area, described a single-engine plane that appeared to circle the location before heading west toward California. The timing aligned with the estimated window when the heist occurred. Aviation authorities were contacted and flight plans reviewed, but no aircraft matched the description or time frame. The witness was interviewed extensively and judged credible, but the lead went nowhere. If a plane had been involved, it was operating without proper documentation or had filed false information. The possibility of an aerial extraction added another layer of sophistication to what was already shaping up as an extraordinarily well-planned operation. As weeks turned to months, the case attracted national attention. The brazen nature of the theft, combined with the mysterious disappearance of the guards, captured public imagination. Theories ranged from elaborate inside jobs to foreign espionage operations. Some suggested the guards had been murdered and their bodies hidden in remote locations. Others believed they had orchestrated the theft themselves and assumed new identities. The FBI classified the case as a priority investigation and assigned a dedicated task force. Financial crimes specialists analyzed banking patterns across the western United States, looking for signs of the stolen currency entering circulation. The serial numbers of larger bills were distributed to banks and monitored electronically. Rewards were offered for information leading to arrests or recovery of the funds. But as the investigation progressed, it became clear that whoever had planned the heist understood how to avoid detection. No significant cash deposits surfaced in regional banks. No unusual purchases or lifestyle changes were documented among potential suspects. The money seemed to have vanished as completely as the men who had been guarding it. By the end of 1976, the active investigation had stalled, and the case remained open, but resources were gradually redirected to newer priorities. Annual reviews continued, and tips were followed up when they came in, but no breakthrough materialized. The $3.9 million had effectively disappeared into the vast emptiness of the Nevada desert, along with 3 men who had simply walked away from their lives and vanished without a trace. The investigation continued sporadically through the late 70s and early 80s, but each lead seemed to evaporate like morning dew in the desert heat. Federal agents interviewed hundreds of potential witnesses, reviewed thousands of financial records, and followed countless tips that led nowhere. The case file grew thick with reports, photographs, and theories, but the core mystery remained untouched. What frustrated investigators most was the precision of the operation. This hadn't been a desperate grab by amateurs. Every detail suggested careful planning, inside knowledge, and professional execution. The substitution of weighted decoy bags alone required advanced preparation and intimate familiarity with transport procedures. Someone had studied the system, identified its weaknesses, and exploited them with surgical precision. The aviation angle continued to intrigue investigators. Multiple witnesses eventually came forward, claiming to have seen or heard aircraft in the vicinity during the time frame of the heist. A retired air traffic controller reported monitoring an unidentified radar contact that appeared briefly in the area before disappearing from screens. A highway patrol officer recalled seeing a small plane flying unusually low near the California border that afternoon. None of these accounts could be definitively verified, but they painted a picture of possible aerial involvement. If accurate, it would explain how the perpetrators had extracted both personnel and cargo from such a remote location without leaving ground-based evidence. The desert floor showed no tire tracks beyond those of the abandoned transport, no footprints leading away from the scene, and no signs of a secondary vehicle. Aviation records were scrutinized extensively. Every registered aircraft within a 200-mile radius was investigated. Owners were interviewed, flight logs examined, and maintenance records reviewed. Several private planes had been in the general area that day, but all had legitimate purposes and credible alibis. The mysterious aircraft, if it existed, had operated completely outside official channels. By 1980, the case had essentially gone cold. Annual reviews became routine paperwork exercises. The reward money remained unclaimed, and the serial numbers of the stolen bills had never surfaced in banking systems. The 3 missing guards had been declared legally dead, their families had collected life insurance, and their names had been added to memorial walls honoring those lost in the line of duty. Yet within law enforcement circles, the case retained a legendary status. It was studied in training academies as an example of near-perfect execution. The complete absence of physical evidence, the sophisticated misdirection techniques, and the seamless disappearance of all participants made it a textbook case of professional criminal operation. Some investigators privately admitted it was the best planned heist they had ever encountered. The years passed quietly. Occasionally, a tip would come in, claiming knowledge of the missing guard's whereabouts or the location of the stolen money. Each was investigated and found to be either mistaken identity or deliberate fabrication. Psychics offered their services. Treasure hunters combed the desert with metal detectors. Amateur investigators published theories in newsletters and early internet forums. But the desert kept its secrets. In 1995, a construction crew working on a highway expansion project discovered human remains in a shallow grave approximately 30 miles from the original crime scene. The discovery briefly reignited interest in the case, as investigators hoped they had finally found the missing guards. Forensic examination revealed the bones belonged to a transient who had died of natural causes several years earlier, completely unrelated to the armored car incident. The false alarm highlighted how thoroughly the case had captured public imagination. Even 20 years later, any discovery in the Nevada desert that might conceivably connect to the missing money drew immediate attention. Local newspapers regularly published anniversary pieces, and the story had become part of regional folklore, passed down through generations of residents who remembered when the FBI had swarmed their quiet communities searching for clues. As the new millennium approached, the case file had been transferred to digital archives. The original investigators had retired or passed away, taking their institutional knowledge with them. Younger agents occasionally reviewed the materials, but without fresh leads or new technology that might reveal previously hidden evidence, there was little to pursue. The statute of limitations had long expired for most potential charges, though murder would remain prosecutable if the guards had indeed been killed. Then, in 2003, 27 years after that scorching August morning, when $3.9 million vanished into thin air, a routine property inspection in Henderson, Nevada, uncovered something that would breathe new life into the dormant investigation. The discovery came about through bureaucratic accident rather than investigative brilliance. Henderson County had launched an initiative to inspect older residential properties for code compliance, focusing particularly on homes that had changed ownership multiple times or sat vacant for extended periods. The program was designed to identify safety hazards and ensure proper maintenance standards in aging neighborhoods. Among the properties flagged for inspection was a modest ranch house built in the early 1970s. The single-story structure sat on 2 acres of scrubland, unremarkable except for its relative isolation from neighboring homes. County records showed it had been purchased in 1977 by a shell corporation based in Wyoming, then sold again in 1985 to another limited liability company registered in Delaware. The ownership history raised no particular red flags at the time. Corporate property ownership was common in Nevada for tax purposes, and the transactions had been properly documented. But what caught the attention of Inspector David Martinez was the condition of the property during his walkthrough. Despite being officially vacant for over a year, the house showed signs of meticulous maintenance. The exterior paint was fresh, the roof appeared recently repaired, and the landscaping was professionally maintained. Interior fixtures were high quality and well preserved. Most puzzling was the basement, which had been extensively renovated far beyond what the modest home would typically warrant. Concrete floors had been sealed and polished. Walls were lined with moisture barriers and climate control equipment. The electrical system was industrial grade, far exceeding residential requirements. Martinez noted these observations in his inspection report, but didn't immediately recognize their significance. The property passed code compliance, and he moved on to other assignments. However, his report was flagged during a routine review by county assessors who were updating property values for tax purposes. The extensive basement improvements suggested the home's assessed value should be higher than current records indicated. A follow-up inspection was scheduled to document the improvements for reassessment purposes. This time, Martinez brought along a photographer to create a visual record of the renovations. As they worked in the basement, the photographer's flash illuminated something unusual in the concrete floor near the far wall. What appeared to be a slight discoloration formed a rectangular pattern, approximately 3 feet by 4 feet. Closer examination revealed the outline was actually a carefully concealed access panel. The concrete had been poured around a metal frame, then finished to match the surrounding floor. Only under direct lighting at a specific angle was the seam visible. Martinez had walked over this spot dozens of times during previous inspections without noticing anything unusual. The discovery protocol required them to halt the inspection and contact law enforcement before disturbing the site. Within hours, Henderson police had secured the scene and requested assistance from federal authorities. Given the property's proximity to Nellis Air Force Base and the sophisticated nature of the concealment, FBI agents were brought in to supervise the investigation. What they found beneath that concrete panel would finally provide answers to questions that had haunted investigators for nearly 3 decades. The panel required specialized equipment to lift safely. FBI technicians used precision tools to avoid damaging whatever lay beneath the reinforced concrete slab. As the heavy cover was slowly raised, Investigators peered into a custom-built chamber that extended 6 feet down into the desert hardpan. The underground space was lined with waterproof materials and equipped with ventilation systems that connected to the basement's climate control network. But it wasn't the construction that caught their attention. It was what remained inside. Stacked along one wall were dozens of empty canvas bags, their military markings still visible despite years of storage. Each bag bore the same federal identification codes used by the Air Force transport system in 1976. Beside them sat 3 sets of clothing, neatly folded and arranged as if their owners had simply stepped out of them and walked away. The garments matched the uniforms worn by armored car guards of that era. Name tags were still attached to the shirts. Marcus Thompson, the senior guard who had vanished that August morning, was identified on one set. The other 2 bore names that matched the missing personnel files exactly. But the most significant discovery lay in a waterproof container placed deliberately in the center of the chamber. Inside, investigators found detailed maps of southern Nevada with routes marked in red ink, flight charts showing private airstrips in eastern California, and a handwritten journal documenting months of surveillance and planning that preceded the heist. The journal entries painted a picture of meticulous preparation. Someone had studied the armored car schedules for over a year, noting patterns in timing, personnel assignments, and route variations. Guard shift rotations were documented with mathematical precision. Radio frequencies used by base security were recorded along with communication protocols. More revealing were the personal details about each guard's life circumstances. The journal contained information about family situations, financial pressures, and individual personalities that could only have been gathered through intimate observation. Whoever had written these notes knew exactly which men would be susceptible to recruitment and which approaches would prove most effective. The handwriting was analyzed by federal experts who determined it belonged to someone with military background, likely officer training based on the precise notation style and tactical terminology used throughout. But attempts to match unsuccessful. The author had been careful to use the writing to known suspects prove block letters rather than cursive, making identification more difficult. As investigators processed the underground chamber, they discovered additional evidence that shed light on the operation's scope. Radio equipment capable of monitoring Air Force communications. Detailed floor plans of the Nellis payroll facility. Even photographs of the specific armored transport vehicle taken weeks before the heist occurred. The aviation component that had puzzled investigators for decades was finally explained through detailed flight plans found in the container. The documents showed a carefully plotted route from a remote desert landing strip to a private airfield in central California. Fuel calculations, weight distributions, and weather contingencies were all accounted for with professional thoroughness. But perhaps most intriguing were the financial records tucked into the journal's back pages. Bank account numbers for offshore institutions in the Caribbean and Central America. Currency conversion rates for various international markets. Instructions for laundering large amounts of cash through legitimate business investments. The sophistication of the money movement plan impressed even veteran financial crimes investigators. This wasn't the work of desperate amateurs hoping to get rich quick. Someone had engineered a systematic approach to converting stolen federal funds into untraceable assets spread across multiple countries and institutions. Agent Sarah Williams, who had been assigned to review the cold case files just months before the discovery, recognized the significance immediately. The evidence confirmed what investigators had long suspected but could never prove. The 1976 heist had been an inside operation, planned and executed by someone with extensive military knowledge and access to classified information. The timing of the property purchase in 1977, just months after the theft, strongly suggested this had been a predetermined safe house. The shell corporations used to maintain ownership provided additional layers of anonymity while keeping the location operational for decades. Someone had been playing a very long game. DNA analysis was conducted on clothing fibers and personal items found in the chamber, but results were inconclusive due to environmental degradation over time. However, investigators were able to confirm that at least some of the materials matched samples taken from the abandoned armored transport 27 years earlier. The discovery prompted a comprehensive review of everyone who had access to the information documented in the journal. Base personnel records were scrutinized. Security clearance holders were investigated. Even civilian contractors who had worked at Nellis during the relevant time period came under renewed scrutiny. One name that emerged from this process was James Mitchell, a former Air Force intelligence officer who had been stationed at Nellis from 1974 to 1978. Mitchell had held security clearances that would have given him access to transport schedules and communication protocols. More significantly, he had left the military abruptly in late 1976, citing family obligations that required his immediate attention. Military records showed Mitchell had been an exemplary officer with commendations for analytical skills and attention to detail. His colleagues described him as methodical and thorough, exactly the type of person who might plan such an elaborate operation. But attempts to locate him proved challenging. After leaving the Air Force, Mitchell had seemingly disappeared from official records. No employment history, no tax filings, no registered addresses after 1978. It was as if he had carefully erased his existence from all government databases, something that would require both technical knowledge and significant planning to accomplish effectively. The investigation team expanded their search internationally, working with federal agencies that specialized in tracking individuals who had assumed false identities. Banking records from the Caribbean institutions mentioned in the journal were subpoenaed, though many of the accounts had been closed decades earlier. What emerged was a pattern of systematic withdrawal and reinvestment that suggested the stolen funds had been successfully laundered through multiple channels. Real estate purchases in Central America, business investments in Europe, even art acquisitions that could be easily transported and resold without generating extensive paperwork trails. The scope of the operation impressed investigators who had worked major organized crime cases. This level of sophistication typically required resources and connections that went far beyond what a single military officer could access alone. Someone had help, likely from individuals with expertise in international finance and document falsification. As the reinvestigation gained momentum, additional properties connected to the shell corporations were identified and searched. Most had been sold or abandoned years earlier, but 2 locations in rural California yielded similar hidden chambers with related materials. One contained additional clothing and personal effects from the missing guards, confirming they had survived the initial heist and participated in the cover-up of their own disappearance. The other held communications equipment and what appeared to be a complete set of false identification documents for multiple individuals. The false documents were analyzed by federal experts who determined they were of exceptional quality, likely produced by someone with access to official government printing equipment and materials. The level of craftsmanship suggested either insider assistance from document production facilities or acquisition of legitimate materials through unauthorized channels. Each discovery raised new questions about the scope of the conspiracy. The evidence pointed to a network of individuals with diverse skills, from military intelligence to financial fraud to document forgery. This wasn't a simple theft that had grown complicated. It was a comprehensive operation designed from the beginning to succeed on multiple levels. The breakthrough that investigators had hoped for was finally within reach. After 27 years of silence, the desert was beginning to reveal its secrets. But with each answer came new mysteries, and the full scope of what had happened in 1976 was only beginning to emerge. The investigation was about to take another dramatic turn, one that would lead them to discoveries they never could have anticipated. The analysis of the false documents led investigators to a startling realization. The quality wasn't just professional, it was government grade. Someone had used actual federal printing equipment to create these identities, complete with authentic watermarks, security features, and serial numbers that would pass even sophisticated verification systems. A forensic document examiner named Marcus Washington was brought in from the Treasury Department to analyze the materials. His expertise in government printing processes revealed that the documents had been produced using equipment identical to what was used at federal facilities during the 1970s. The paper stock, ink composition, and printing techniques all matched official specifications exactly. This discovery narrowed the suspect pool significantly. Only a handful of facilities had access to such equipment, and personnel with the technical knowledge to operate it were even fewer. The investigation team began cross-referencing employment records from government printing operations with military personnel who had served at Nellis during the relevant time frame. The search led them to a small printing facility that had operated under contract with the Defense Department from 1974 to 1979. Located in a nondescript industrial complex outside Las Vegas, the operation had produced identification cards, travel documents, and security passes for military installations throughout the region. Employment records from the facility revealed several individuals who had also maintained connections to Nellis Air Force Base. Most were civilian contractors who moved between various government projects, but one name stood out. A former employee had left the printing facility abruptly in late 1976, citing a family emergency that required immediate relocation. The timing was too coincidental to ignore. The employee had departed just weeks after the armored car heist, abandoning a steady position without providing proper notice or forwarding information. Colleagues described him as reliable and skilled, making the sudden departure completely out of character. Attempts to trace this individual proved as challenging as the search for Mitchell. After leaving Las Vegas, he had vanished from all official records with the same thoroughness that characterized the entire operation. No forwarding addresses, no subsequent employment, no tax filings or government interactions of any kind. The pattern was becoming clear. This wasn't a case of criminals covering their tracks after committing a crime. These individuals had planned their disappearances as carefully as they had planned the theft itself. Every aspect of their exit strategy had been designed to make them untraceable through conventional investigative methods. Agent Williams began exploring a different approach. Instead of trying to track the perpetrators directly, she focused on the money itself. The offshore banking records contained enough information to trace some of the financial movements, even decades later. International banking regulations had tightened significantly since the 1970s, making it possible to request cooperation from foreign institutions that would have been unthinkable during the original investigation. The first breakthrough came from a bank in the Cayman Islands that had maintained records of large cash deposits made in 1977 and 1978. The deposits matched the denominations and approximate timing consistent with laundering the stolen payroll funds. More importantly, the bank retained copies of identification documents used to establish the accounts. The documents showed 3 individuals who'd opened accounts within months of each other, each depositing substantial amounts of cash in small increments to avoid triggering reporting requirements. The identification matched the false documents found in the California properties, confirming the connection between the theft and the money laundering operation. Working with international law enforcement agencies, investigators traced the funds through multiple transfers and conversions. The money had been moved systematically through banks in several countries, converted to different currencies, and ultimately used to purchase legitimate assets that could be easily liquidated when needed. Real estate records in Costa Rica showed properties purchased with cash in the early 1980s by individuals using the same false identities. Business investments in European markets followed similar patterns. Even art purchases from auction houses in New York and London could be traced back to the laundered funds. The sophistication of the money movement impressed financial crimes specialists who had worked cases involving major organized crime syndicates. This level of international coordination required connections and expertise that went beyond what the identified suspects could have managed alone. Someone had provided guidance on navigating complex international banking systems and investment markets. The $3.9 million Nevada heist that vanished without a trace in 1976 had finally yielded its secrets 27 years later. What began as a routine property inspection became the key that unlocked one of the most sophisticated military thefts in American history. The desert had kept its silence for decades, but concrete floors and hidden chambers ultimately revealed the truth. Sometimes the most perfectly executed crimes leave behind just enough evidence to ensure that justice, however delayed, eventually finds its way to the surface.